Hello again, wrestling fans, and welcome to another edition of the Good Friends, Better Enemies podcast. My name is Jay, and this week we are joined by a very special guest. James, from that 90s wrestling podcast, all the way over from England across the pond. We are recording on a lovely, well, it's gloomy here in Ontario, a gloomy, rainy Monday evening. How are things over on your end of the world?
Not much better. It's coming into winter now, so it's been wet and windy, and I'm dreading the cold. I like the cold when you're inside; it's nice and warm. The problem for me, I work outside, so not great.
Yeah, no, not at all. You got to make sure you bundle up. You don't want to be catching a cold, especially with everything else going on in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special list to conduct this week. Typically, we do our rebooking, and last week, of course, we did a watch-along with Nick from the Universal Wrestling Podcast. But this week, we are going to borrow a page once again from our counterparts over at the Counted Out 7 podcast with Mike and Tyler, as we present to you the top 7 Jeff Hardy matches / moments of his career. And James, this was your idea. Why don't you tell us about what gravitated you towards this list and sort of where it germinated from?
Yeah, so my number one wrestler of all time is Bret Hart, but I know Tyler and I know Counted Out, and I know yous have covered Bret Hart more than enough. So I'm like, well, Jeff Hardy's my second favorite all-time wrestler, and it's weird. I don't think there's too many people that does many lists about Jeff Hardy, and I mean the guy's had a Hall of Fame career easily, and one of the biggest baby faces of all time, and when you messaged me, I was like, yeah, I thought Jeff Hardy list would be pretty good. And I don't think you've done one. So I thought, yeah, we'll go for that.
Yeah, that's a very fair point. I do know that we have had a lot of mentions of Bret Hart on our sister podcast, the Counted Out 7. We would be happy to have you back again to do a Bret Hart list. I've been chomping at the bit to do one. And in fact, my partner, who is absent this week, Tyrone, is not the biggest Bret Hart fan. So if I could speak with a fellow Hitman enthusiast, I'm all about it. But for this week's content, we are definitely hitting on Jeff Hardy and his storied career. Now, for the purposes of this particular list, James, I have stuck to WWE moments in his career. I'm not sure if you gravitated off to Impact Land or what, but sorry, you said you've done the same?
Yeah, I mean, he's had a good career in Impact Wrestling. He's done, and obviously he's had both bad moments in Impact. But yeah, I mean, you talk Jeff Hardy, and straight away he's a WWE guy. So same here. I stuck to WWE.
That sounds perfect. So before we get into the list, I just wanted to briefly, for our listening audience here today, and whenever they choose to consume this content, I wanted you to maybe briefly tell us about your podcast, tell us about your content. And I know that you've had some great success in terms of booking some wonderful talents on to speak with you. And you really have a wonderful product. So kudos to you and thank you for the content that you provide. But could you tell us a little bit about your particular podcast and maybe hit us with some handles and maybe just get a little plug in?
Yeah, thank you very much. That's great. Great. I love it when people says nice things about the podcast because believe me, I've got a lot of haters. But yeah, started that 90s wrestling podcast last year during the lockdown because I'm self-employed and I'm a contractor, I suppose you'd called it. All the building merchants were closed, so I was stuck at home for 3 months. So I'm like, what am I going to do? So I thought, well, I've always been interested in doing a wrestling podcast, so I start one. And even though the name of my podcast makes no sense at all, because originally the original concept was just to purely review 90s WWE pay-per-views, and we done that in the beginning, went on the hiatus, and now we're doing that again. We do that once a month. We bring out a new episode. We've just released but at the time of this recording, I think we'll just be releasing King of the Ring 93, so we're going straight into that new generation era. So that's been great, but I've just been so lucky in getting so many guests on the show. Eric Bischoff, Rob Van Dam, for example, so many. Vince Russo, which Vince Russo is actually one of my favorite interviews. Because love him or hate him, the guy's a personality. And yeah, just been fortunate to strike a deal with Impact Wrestling. I'm on good terms with the men and women over there, and I get to do monthly interviews with them every month, which is awesome. Same with Ring of Honor. So been fortunate, and fingers crossed. currently in talks with WWE, so hopefully that happens, and I'll be bringing some interviews with active WWE stars.
Oh, that's excellent. Great news. I'm very happy to hear that. So you have a lot going on, and yeah, some of the guests that you have booked have been absolutely tremendous. I've been riveted by some of the interviews, specifically somebody like an Eric Bischoff, who I know is very polarizing in terms of the wrestling, internet wrestling community and wrestling fan base in general. I have a great appreciation for what he's done for the business, as well as post, being involved in the business specifically. I really enjoy his 83 Weeks podcast and offering. So that was a really interesting interview, and I really appreciated your taking the time and getting him on board. Now, with that being said, where can our listening audience find you on social media? Where we can find you on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook?
Yeah, I mean, you can follow me. Well, you can follow the podcast obviously on YouTube and on their podcasting platforms, and you can follow me on Twitter at 90s Wrestling Pod, and Instagram and on Facebook that 90s Wrestling Podcast. And I forgot to also mention, so one of the previous guests I had was Rene Dupree, which I know he's pretty popular over there in Canada, and we had a great interview and came on the show a couple of times. And since then, I know it sounds corny, but we have developed a genuine friendship. And since then, we've actually created a new podcast, Cafe de Rene, and that's been doing really well. And funny enough, just now I've just released our interview, our chat with Rene's former La Resistance tag team partner, Sylvain Granray, which it's one of my favorite episodes I've ever recorded on both my shows. So if people's also interested in that, if you want to hear me and Rene talk about the week's latest news, but also have special guests and talk about his time and more of his career, please check out Cafe de Rene with Rene Dupree, which is also available on YouTube, on podcast, and there's also a Instagram and Twitter page to that.
That's excellent. I'm so happy to hear that. And again, not to be, too overly complimentary, but I do want to say that I am very grateful that you are doing such as great, having such great success with your podcast. It's great to see one of the good guys get out there and really make a great splash. And we're all thrilled for you, and we're really thankful that you're out there getting your name out, because I've always been of the belief that when one person has great success, it trickles down and helps everybody, as opposed to kind of holding it all to yourself. So I really am such an admirer of yours, and so grateful that you've made the time to come on with us this week. Thank you again so much.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I love going on people's shows. And I always say it, it's just nice to be the Bobby Heenan where I don't need a script. I can just go freestyle.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. So with all that being said, now that we've paid the light bills, I would like to briefly get into this list with you. Let's go ahead and dig into this. This week, we again, ladies and gentlemen, we're covering the top 7 Jeff Hardy moments in WWE. Now, that doesn't mean that it's exclusively his singles career. Of course, we're going to talk about his tag team career as well. So I think I'm going to let you take the mantle here and just go ahead and offer up your opening salvo. What is your number 7 on your list, my friend?
Yeah, I mean, to start things off, I didn't realize how tough this list was going to be because, like I said, I'm a massive Jeff Hardy fan. So to narrow it to 7, and don't get me wrong, my number three pick, I cheated. But yeah, as for number 7, him defeating Triple H for the IC title. I think it was on SmackDown in 2001, and yet, I mean, obviously he was still mainly a tag team with obviously Matt during his time, and you had the 2-man power trip of Austin and Triple H running wild. And yeah, the match was set for him against Triple H, and few shenanigans, Matt Hardy intervened, and Jeff Hardy, which was the upset of the year that year, defeated Triple H, who obviously was a top guy, and Jeff was still a tag guy. Yeah, what a great upset. And I know he only kept the title for like a week or like a few days, but as a big Hardy Boys fan and Team Extreme, and I must have been 11 at that time or 12, that was such a massive moment for me. So yeah, that edges number 7 for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember that very viscerally, that particular moment. I think it was a device to try to get all the championships on the 2-man power trip post WrestleMania 17. So, of course, I recall that. And, Triple H having the Intercontinental Championship in 2001 was a bit of a disconnect for me. So it
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense that Jeff Hardy would go over. Of course, as you alluded to earlier, he would then drop the title in fairly short order. But I think for the purposes of trying to help elevate some of these younger talents, and maybe at some point have, say, a Jeff and a Matt Hardy do some singles matches, and of course evolve into singles careers. This was a moment in time that helped elevate both guys, and of course bringing Jeff Hardy into the forefront. This was at a time when I think that Jeff Hardy was seen by many in the wrestling community, as well as I think the office itself. He was the more popular of the two Hardy boys and maybe the more logical choice for a singles run. But
Yeah.
as time has proven out, obviously both men have excelled and exceeded anybody's expectations as to how far they would get in the business. So I'm very happy with this number 7 choice. I think it's very logical. I mean, Jeff Hardy's first run was, as they say, a cup of coffee, but going on to bigger and better things afterwards. So good choice.
Oh, thank you.
So my number 7 I have is actually the finals of the Terry Invitational Tournament, the TIT tournament. From No Mercy 1999. I have Edge and Christian going up against the Hardy Boys in a winner-take-all ladder match. Now, this match was very well worked. Of course, there would already been a bit of a rivalry between these two teams, obviously to no extent of where it would get to down even about a year or so away from where we are at this match. But this was kind of, to me, the catalyst for what we would see in the upcoming years, of course, with the TLC matches and the triangle ladder match at WrestleMania 20. So we were going to be seeing a lot from these two teams and a lot of interaction. But this was kind of the opening salvo. This was what you were getting in terms of the first, I guess, to steal a phrase from the kids these days, shots fired. So I really appreciated the match. I went back and watched it. I hadn't seen it for a while. It was very well worked and, in fact, quite revolutionary for the time. I don't know. I might be misquoting myself here, but I don't recall seeing a tag team ladder match in WWE before this match. Do you have any memories of this one?
Oh, yeah, great memories. And yeah, you're right. I think this is actually the first ever tag team ladder match in WWE because, I mean, it's weird because we see ladder matches a dozen these days, but like Vince McMahon didn't use ladder matches that much. Obviously, there was Brett and Shawn, which was on the show, and then you had Razor and Shawn, and then you went a few years and you had Rock and Triple H, and then I think this was actually the 4th ladder match in WWE. I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was, but definitely the first tag team ladder match. And yeah, I mean, this is on my list, but like I said, I'm cheating for number 3, but this is definitely on the list. But yeah, I mean, this match is awesome. And standing ovation during the match, and even the Raw the night after, the 4 men just stood in the ring and got a standing ovation from the audience and innovators. I mean, this match, it was just unbelievable. Jeff walking the ladders and, grabbing it at the end, but so many memorable spots in this match, and this literally was a springboard. These literally got these from lower end tag team because obviously you still had like the Outlaws and the APA and such, who were still like the big dogs in the tag team division at the time. Even like Rock and Mankind and whoever, like they were still the main guys, but these 4 lads, and obviously we got the Dudleys to come in, elevated themselves from bottom of the mid card to top of the mid card and feuding for the tag team titles for the next 2 to 3 years to come. So unbelievable match, and yeah, star making performance for all 4 men.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the tag teams that sometimes gets lost in the shuffle at this time was a team, the Acolytes. They were not quite the APA yet. They were still kind of doing that satanic gimmick.
Yeah.
Sort of an offshoot of the Ministry of Darkness. The Ministry of Darkness, or even the corporate ministry at this point, had been sort of long in the rearview mirror, but they were still kind of gravitating towards that satanic type gimmick before they broke into the Acolyte Protection Agency. But nonetheless, they were having a phenomenal run as a tag team, and really was a breath of new life into Ron Simmons' career, extending his career with Bradshaw. So they were another dominant tag team that would be rivals of the Hardy Boys in the weeks and months and, of course, years ahead. So, yeah, absolutely. So without being with that being said, rather, what would be your number 6, James?
Yeah, so number 6 was Jeff Hardy defeating CM Punk at Night of Champions 2008 for up to that, for the time being, his final world title in WWE. It was his third world title, his second world heavyweight title. So, I mean, story of this, after WrestleMania 25, he finished up his feud with his brother Matt Hardy. Then at Extreme Rules, he had a great ladder match with Edge, which very underrated ladder match and great pre-match build up to it also. Defeated Edge that night. CM Punk was the Money in the Bank, and he cashed in that night against Jeff Hardy, effectively turning him heel, which Jeff Hardy, in my opinion, made CM Punk a star in WWE, because CM Punk, even though he already been world champion beforehand, that title reign was a flop on Raw. Safe to say, he was popular in ECW, but Jeff Hardy elevated CM Punk to a legit main eventer, I believe. And great feud, and that Night of Champions, great match. They had the rematch. There was the point where CM Punk tried to walk out on the match. Jeff brought him back in, hit Twist of Fate, Swanton, got the 1-2-3, great moment, and it eventually led to their match at SummerSlam, where CM Punk defeated Jeff, and Jeff left WWE not long after this, and we didn't see him for quite a while. But this match itself, it was a great moment, and I remember specifically where I was watching it, because I was on a lad's holiday, beer trip over in Ireland. It was like me and 4 other guys, so we basically just took a week off work just to go to Dublin and just have a full week in Dublin getting drunk, and we did. Fortunately, Irish people are big wrestling fans, so we found an Irish bar, caught the wrestling, and yeah, this was the main event of the show, and yeah, it was such a great atmosphere because there were so many like wrestling fans and so many Jeff Hardy fans. So yeah, just fun memories.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting that you mentioned that, because I find that so much of my wrestling enjoyment these days is purely emotional in terms of
Yes.
nostalgic viewing, and hence your podcast, that 90s wrestling podcast. 90s for me was my sweet spot. I started watching in 1996. And of course, in my mind's eye, 96 and 97 are the greatest years in the history of wrestling, just basically due to my bias of the fact that those are my favorite memories from childhood. I think, it's something of the same thing. People will tell you, growing up, that Hulk Hogan was their favorite, or, even later on, I'm now speaking with people like Anthony from the Titantron podcast, who waxed nostalgic about, 2009 and 2010, which for me was a period where, I was still invested in the product, but not nearly to the extent that I would have been 15 or 14 years earlier. So it's interesting that you bring up that point, and it's something that seems to resonate quite frequently throughout these podcasts when we have guests, that people really do view wrestling through the lens of nostalgia and an emotional view. This particular match, I will be honest with you, I don't have a great recollection of. I do have on my list the match that they had at SummerSlam 2009, which was a TLC match. I have great fondness for that match, and that was, in fact, I believe, Hardy's last appearance in the company for several years. In fact, I think until my number 6, which is the return of the Hardy Boys at WrestleMania 33. This moment for me, again, going back to the nostalgia, going back to the emotion, was a purely emotional wrestling fan nostalgic pop of a moment. I mean, you were just completely entranced and fixated on this particular moment. It was one of the biggest pops I've ever heard on television. Of course, I've heard a lot of pops in person.
Yeah.
I can only imagine what it sounded like in Orlando for this. Of course, we as wrestling fans that are kind of plugged in have an idea sometimes of what's going to happen. And there had been some rumblings or rumors that perhaps the Hardy Boys, but nobody really took it seriously. I don't think anybody really bought that it was going to happen. They had wrestled that ladder match the night before. I believe it was for ROH. So we get this moment at WrestleMania 33, which was just one of the greatest all-time returns in WrestleMania history, you got to think, no?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's actually number 4 on my list. But yeah, great moment. And like you said, we heard rumors. I think we all knew there was Yeah, it was pretty much confirmed it was done with Impact Wrestling, and I think there was in the ladder match against the Young Bucks the night before. I might be wrong, but you hear rumors, and then obviously at the time the freeway ladder match was happening, and I was actually cheering on for Big Cass and Enzo. They was my guys at the time, and also the New Day came out, and they said it was going to become a four-way, and then I thought, oh, the New Day must be joining in the match because Kofi Kingston's taking off his hat. But then the crowd, you can start hearing them say, what do you call it? Hoo, hoo, hoo. And all of a sudden, dum, dum, dum. And I had the biggest smile on my face. And like over here, I'm watching WrestleMania. It's like 3 a.m. in the morning. There's only two shows I stay up for. It's Royal Rumbles and WrestleMania. And I was so glad I stayed up for it because if I got spoiled the next day, I would have been happy that they came back, but it wouldn't have been the same. And I remember when they came back and they popped through, I had the biggest smile on my face. And what made it even sweeter, it was Jeff Hardy's first victory at WrestleMania, believe it or not.
Yeah, it's funny again that you mentioned that because I have had this conversation with a couple of friends, and I have sort of gotten to a place in my wrestling fandom where I am not as interested in the backstage. I mean, of course, I find it very, fascinating from a fan's perspective, but in terms of spoilers or hearing about who's backstage, I'm at a place now where I want to be surprised again. I don't want to know that's happening. I mean, I'll give you a perfect example. Was this last year's Royal Rumble when Christian appeared? I couldn't believe it, and I was almost moved to tears seeing him because I didn't think that there was ever a possibility of him being able to return in any kind of in-ring physical capacity. So for me, I was so incredibly grateful that I wasn't aware of it beforehand, because when we get those genuine surprises as fans, I feel especially with social media, it's really taken that away from us. Before the internet, I remember a time when we didn't know who the surprise entrants were in the Royal Rumble unless you were subscribing to an actual newsletter that was being mailed to your house. You wouldn't know. And so I miss those moments of pure joy and pure surprise. And I feel as though I have sort of stolen them from myself by being so invested in the product. So it was one of those moments where we kind of knew, we kind of didn't, but it was a moment of pure joy for everybody. And then of course they had a pretty fun run there for a little while. In fact, I remember they had a match against Sheamus and Cesaro at the Great Balls of Fire pay-per-view a few months after this. That was a phenomenal match. If memory serves, it was a 2 out of 3 falls. And it was really, really good. So I was happy to see them back in the company. Whether or not we're pleased with how they were used when they came back is another story. But all in all, really, really enjoyed that return. So we go from there to your number 5, sir. What do you have for me?
Yeah, I mean, number 5, and this was a big stepping point for Jeff Hardy. His feud with Randy Orton heading into the Royal Rumble 2008, but particularly his swanton off the stage to Orton. Big moment. And Jeff Hardy, no, it was Rumble 07, was it Rumble? Yeah, it was Rumble 08, was it? I think it was. Yep. Yeah, it was. Yes, my mistake.
Madison Square Garden.
That's right. Yeah, great Royal Rumble. That was a great pay-per-view in general, and they had a great and I thought they had a real fun match. And at this time, Jeff Hardy was one of the most over baby faces in the company. Fans loved him. People can't put their finger on it why Jeff Hardy's so popular. And yeah, he's got the flashy moves, but even then, really, he's only really got the swanton, and his wrestling is pretty basic. But I mean, the guy, he's the greatest wrestler when it comes to ragdoll physics, because it looks like every time he takes a bump, he's in a car crash. But people because it's like you compare him to Matt, and like growing up at first, I was a Matt Hardy fan. I quickly switched to Jeff, and Matt Hardy's a better wrestler. He's a better promo, and he's more intelligent when it comes to wrestling. But he's not Jeff. And people gravitate towards Jeff, and they say, they say it's that it factor. And Jeff has just got it. He's just that popular with the fans. And going into this Royal Rumble match with Orton and this feud, and he was IC champ at the point as well. He was having a good feud with Umaga as well. I I was and it's a shame as well with the song because the song leading up to Royal Rumble was Lost Prophets, but unfortunately I don't listen to Lost Prophets now because the singer was a naughty boy. Um, but the song Rooftops was a great song, but I just can't listen to it anymore. But that was the song going into it for Jeff Hardy, and the promo, the package, everything. I was so convinced that Jeff was going to defeat Randy Orton that night to become champion, and I was so behind him. It didn't happen, but it was a great feud. And yeah, that spot where he done I mean, he's done many dives, but to do a swanton not off the stage, or, well, not even stage, like the scaffolding or whatever it was, he must have jumped about 50 feet, swanton into Orton, just an awesome moment and great feud. And it was one of them stepping stones what elevated him, and and he was selling good merch, and I think it was opening WWE's eyes to say, yeah, this guy could be champion. And the month after this, at No Way Out, he was in the Elimination Chamber. He made it to the final two with Triple H, and he's kicked out of a pedigree, which you know yourself, it's very rare that people kicks out of pedigrees, and it took Triple H pedigreeing Jeff Hardy onto a chair to win him. And the original plan, like, people actually wanted, because that, I think that title match ended up becoming a three-way between Cena, Orton, and Triple H, and a lot of people wanted Jeff added to it to make it a four-way. But I think the original plan was that Jeff was going to win Money in the Bank that year and cash in to have a match with Triple H at SummerSlam. Unfortunately, Jeff got into trouble and it wasn't to happen, and he had to wait a year later. But this feud done so much for Jeff Hardy to make him like a main event player. So yeah, Jeff, the swanton to Orton, but the feud in general is my number 5.
Yeah, I can't argue with that at all. That's a great choice. I think that you're talking about the spots and what a tremendous feat it was. 2008 was quite the interesting year for Jeff Hardy. He had a lot of ebbs and
Yeah.
flows in his career, but in terms of this particular match, I do remember it. It was a very good event as a whole, but I was quite taken with. This was at a time when Jeff was still taking some pretty extreme bumps in terms of what he would do to please the audience. I think he's toned down that a little bit now. I don't think, first of all, I don't know that his body would be too receptive to it, but
Yeah.
I am very, very gratified that you put this on the list. This, in fact, is not on my list.
Yeah.
I'm actually kind of grateful that we're not having a lot of overlap thus far. We seem to be hitting separate moments, which is great because we're going to get a better picture of his career in that regard. So
Yeah, it's great.
for my number 5, I have actually got the 2 TLC matches. I've got TLC 1 and TLC 2.
Yeah.
People might be questioning as to why they're a little bit higher on my list. Personally, from my perspective, as much as I know that they did for the collective careers of all men involved, I personally don't care for these types of matches. I'm more of a just regular in-ring wrestling type guy. I mean, I don't mind the odd cage match or Falls Count Anywhere type situation, maybe a Hell in the Cell once a year, but this is not my cup of tea. So for that reason, on a purely selfish or personal level, I just couldn't put it higher on my list. I do have a great amount of respect for everybody's contributions to the match. And of course, there have been so many great moments and historic moments that are still played to this day in video packages and things of that nature. But for me, ultimately, it wasn't something that I gravitated towards. It's not a match that I've gone back and rewatched. I think I've maybe only seen it 2 or 3 times in the last 20 years or so. What about you? How do you feel about the TLC matches?
Yeah, so this is actually me number 3, and like I mentioned earlier, I'm kind of cheating because that tag team ladder match you mentioned, that No Mercy. So this is my number 3. It's basically this three-way tag feud with E and C and the Dudleys. So you had the tag team ladder match at No Mercy. A few months after this, you had the tag team tables match at Rumble 2000 against the Dudleys at MSG. Great match. And that led to WrestleMania 2000, the three-way ladder match, which led to TLC 1 at SummerSlam, then obviously culminated at TLC 2 in WrestleMania 7. And just, it's to me, it's the golden era of tag team wrestling. these three of the most popular acts on TV, and all three tag teams. I know Edge is in the Hall of Fame. Dudley's is in the Hall of Fame. Eventually, Christian's going to return. Same with Matt Hardy. They'll get their places in the Hall of Fame, and obviously, by now everyone knows Jeff Hardy's Hall of Fame worthy already. Like these three tag teams took tag team wrestling to another level, and it was so popular. And these matches, it's weird because some people don't like hardcore matches or ladder matches, and that's great. Like that's if that's what people thinks, that's what people thinks. I'm kind of the same, but these ladder matches took a special moment for me because it culminated. This three-way tag feud, in my opinion, was the pinnacle of tag team wrestling at a point where for me, this was the pinnacle of WWE, the peak of mainstream wrestling. Like after WrestleMania X7, because WrestleMania X7, I always say, and it's my opinion, that is the peak of wrestling. Wrestling will never be as popular as that point. And after that, it's been on decline ever since. And for these three tag teams to be putting on all these great matches, great feuds, and at the peak of professional wrestling itself, it was amazing. And I find it hard to rank like which matches I like the best. I love to, like I mentioned, I love the tag table match with the Dudleys. I love obviously the TIT tournament. Plus, we got to see Terry Reynolds. That's never a bad thing. But yeah, TLC 1 was great. The triangle ladder match at Mania 2000 was great. But this Mania X7, and I was actually going to pick the moment where Edge speared Jeff Hardy, but even though, in my opinion, it's partly a Jeff Hardy moment, it's more Edge's moment, but that moment stands out so much, like in the history of wrestling. And WrestleMania X7, like I said, is the greatest WrestleMania of all time, and a lot of people says this match that night was the best match of the card. So to be the best match of the greatest WrestleMania of all time, it's not a bad thing.
No, not at all. That is a very good point. That it's very difficult to pick in terms of those gimmick matches. It really centered around those three teams, the Christian, the Dudleys, and the Hardys. It was the focal point of the tag division for the better part of the Attitude Era, and then of course the aforementioned Acolytes. You had Too Cool in there, and I would say before Edge and Christian became sort of the mainstays, along with the Hardys and the Dudleys, it was the New Age Outlaws. I don't really think that those teams necessarily overlap. I think by the time we get to the year 2000 or 2001, we weren't seeing a lot of the New Age Outlaws at that point. They were kind of off in separate directions and in singles feuds and things of that nature. So to your point, I really do think that if you're going to classify this particular era as the golden age for you, some folks will say the golden age of tag teams was the 80s. Whereas some folks would say the Attitude Era. So it's all apples and oranges, right? And I do definitely agree with you. Now, if I had to pick one for myself, one that that stands out for me over the lot in terms of these three teams and their interaction, I would probably be more leaning towards the WrestleMania 20 or to WrestleMania 2000 match, rather. I just thought that for me, that match was a little bit more psychologically based, whereas I think that there was just a lot of high spots and plunder in the TLC matches that for me, as a personal choice, again, it's not my cup of tea. So out of all those matches, I would probably go with the first one. But absolutely, I can understand completely why people gravitate towards those matches. They are big time matches with huge stakes. There's some degree of real danger there involved because those spots can go wrong in the blink of an eye. So yeah, I think that you've absolutely hit the nail right on the head in terms of those matches. Going into number 4, I'm curious to see if it's going to be another tag team match or if it's going to be a singles match.
All right, so but mine now, I'm actually down to 2 now because a couple of your answers was on mine. So I'm number 2 next. What number are you next?
I'm number 4, but that's fine. We can just amalgamate, and if there's something on your list that we've already covered, then we can just gloss over it. That's completely fine. We'll do a final tally at the end of the list to remember which are yours and which are mine. And I think by the time we collectively come to the end, we would have done a pretty good service to Jeff Hardy's career here.
Oh, cool. Yeah, so I'll go next then, I suppose. So number two, another ladder match, but this time he's ladder match against The Undertaker for the Undisputed title on Raw. I actually just watched this again tonight, actually. Just before we started recording, I thought, oh, I'll just give that a quick watch. I haven't watched it for a bit. And like I mentioned earlier with the Triple H match, that kind of started elevating Jeff, testing the waters to see if he was a singles. And during this time, this was just before the draft happened, or round about the draft time. So soon, like we would see Matt Hardy turn heel and go to SmackDown, and Jeff would be staying on Raw, but they were still tagging at this point, and Undertaker was the undisputed champion. A few months earlier, he had like a little brief feud with the Hardys where he was attacking all three, and he was like the American biker, and it gets a lot of hate, American biker taker. I actually love it. I was a fan of it. But yeah, they had the match one week, and Jeff Hardy challenged him to a ladder match, and wow, this was a coming out party. Just a great match. Awesome. It really tests the waters, and like I said with Jeff, he just had this it factor, and the fans were behind him. And when you watch the match, I think a lot of fans genuinely believed he was going to beat the Undertaker for the undisputed title. And there was the part Jim Ross on commentary calls it, "Come on, kid, make yourself famous," and he actually touches the belt, and I was like, "Man, you're so close." And like I said, as a teenager, so I'm 12, coming 13 at the time. Jeff Hardy was my guy, and I, I, I kind of didn't think he was gonna do it because I'm like, because when you're still 11, 12, 13, you still believe in kayfabe, which is a glorious thing. I do miss kayfabe, and you're like, oh man, it's Jeff Hardy. Here's his chance, but I don't know, man. Can he beat the Undertaker? But it was a great match, real fun match, and obviously Undertaker wins, chokeslams Jeff at the end. And the big talking point was at the end, Jeff gets on the microphone, said, I'm still standing. You never broke me. Undertaker returns to the ring. It looks like Taker's going to kill him, but Taker picks him up and shakes his hand and, like, you earn my respect. And yeah, Jeff made himself a star that night, a single star that night. So great moment. And after this, I think he had a couple of title runs with the European title, had a brief feud with RVD again, more of a mutual friendly rivalry this time. And floating the card a little bit, didn't really do too much after this. I know he started getting more substance issues, and the following year he got released or he left, and we didn't see him for a few years till he returned. But yeah, this match was a big moment for Jeff's career, and it's something that's on repeat in my head all the time.
Without question. It's funny that you mentioned that because it's actually the number 2 on my list as well.
All right.
I think that this was very indicative of what they were trying to do with these brand splits, specifically the first brand split, which would have been this one in 2002. And then there were a few obligatory brand splits after that as well. Then we kind of stopped doing that for a period of time, and then we got back into it. So there was a lot of in and out hokey pokey with the brand splits. I think that by the time we got about 8 years past this point, we would kind of amalgamated the rosters again. And then we tried doing the brand splits again in 2016. My point being that it seems to me like this was kind of in the spirit of what we were trying here. You have The Undertaker, who is going up against a young upstart Jeff Hardy, who had tremendous success as a tag team specialist, of course, in the aforementioned TLC matches and things of that nature. So we're giving him an opportunity now because we've split the brands. This to me is exactly what the brand split should be all about, is taking an established star, arguably the most established star in terms of lineage and history with the company, The Undertaker, and having him defend his championship out of his element in a ladder match going up against Jeff Hardy. To me, absolutely screams what we were trying to accomplish with the brand split back in 2002. So I'm very glad that you chose this match. I am quite taken with it as well. It was a real spectacle. And I think that in terms of the ladder matches that we had seen previous, this was something that the ladder wasn't as much the focal point of the match. It was kind of the device to get and create drama within and get those high spots, get those hope spots, things of that nature. But once you get into the meat and bones of the match, the meat and potatoes of the match, you really see that it's a story of a young, eager, hardworking, hungry kid who wants to make a name for himself, and he comes so close, but ultimately gets put down by, his name was, the American Badass, the Biker Taker, Booger Red, whatever you want to call him. He puts him down, but you can see even in the facials that the Undertaker had after the match that he was quite impressed with the performance and knows that this young kid is nipping at his heels, and maybe he's not going to be so fortunate to come out on the winning end of things the next time they meet.
Yeah, I mean, you explained that well. And it's great just having this, because Jeff Hardy, so like over here to watch at the time to watch WWE, you needed Sky satellite, and I never had it. So during the Monday Night Wars, I actually watched WCW a lot more because it was more easily accessible, and I kind of kept up with what was happening in WWE. Sometimes if I stayed at my grandparents, they had Sky, so I'd be like, oh, I can watch wrestling. And I had sometimes my father would treat me like to the videotapes. And I remember UK listeners will know what I'm talking about. There's a mainstream channel, we got a vehicle, Channel 4, and they struck a deal with WWE to show like 6 pay-per-views of the year. Unfortunately, that deal soon got scrapped because the cat got stripped naked at Armageddon '99, and then the next month, Malin got her boobs out at the Rumble. So Channel 4 was upset with WWE, so the deal got cancelled. But as I said, that Rumble 2000, it was the first time I actually saw the Hardy Boys, and Jeff Hardy stood out to me because obviously he does the swanton off the stage through to Bubba and Devon. And straight away, I was just attached to him. I'm like, man, this guy's so good. And he was still a kid. What was he been like? 22 at the time, 23. He was still like a kid. It's weird because he's been in W for years, but he was still really young. And I kind of like followed his career. I know he was in WWE like a year or so beforehand, but even then, that was still like early on in his career. And I kind of like got him near enough the beginning of his WWE career, and I just like stayed in touch with that career like all the way through to this point, and obviously further on. But yeah, after seeing him win the tag titles, European titles, light heavyweight, and IC titles, when he's getting this big shot against the world title, and I believe it's his first shot at a world title, like, just gravitated towards him, and he was my guy, and didn't make it, but definitely a star-making performance. And when Taker wants to put someone over, he puts them over, and he put Jeff over huge that night.
Oh, absolutely. I don't think much more can be said about the match. It was absolutely tremendous. And then, of course, as you alluded to, that's very unfortunate about what happened with Channel 4. That they were maybe they weren't the biggest fans of the content at the time, and I can completely understand that. I mean, boy, even here in Canada, we had an affiliate named TSN. It's the sports network, and they were actually censoring a lot of the content that we would be getting from the USA feed, because there was just some stuff that was so over the top that, for a child, you want to talk about, we're not gearing towards children that, you're too young, don't watch. You're coming from a product that was geared towards children for the better part of 15 years, and then suddenly you make the switch. Of course, kids are still going to want to watch. So I completely understand the
as a young, impressionable 11 to 12-year-old, I wasn't complaining.
Yeah, and you know what? Neither was I. I did not hate that moment at Armageddon whatsoever. I was hoping they would become a regular segment, actually. But
do you remember? I know I'm going off topic. Do you remember BB?
I do. Barbara Bush.
Whatever happened to her? Wasn't she dating Hardcore Holly, I think?
I think, yeah. I don't know. Maybe they got married. That was her name. They called her BB, and for some reason they were naming her Barbara Bush. I have no idea why, but yeah, there were a lot of people in and out of the company at that time, and definitely, obviously, we are very happy about where the women's revolution has come to at this point, and we're talking about a moment in time that is much different than what we are accustomed to today. But no, there was definitely some hijinks going on in the Attitude Era. And again, as you alluded to, when you're a young, impressionable, red-blooded young man, you are quite enthralled with some of the content that they were providing vis-a-vis the divas at the time in the WWF.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, without question. So I'm just going to quickly catch us up. So we've now agreed upon our number 2.
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple of other entries here, so I can catch up with you. My number 4 was actually Rob Van Dam versus Jeff Hardy at the Invasion pay-per-view in 2001. I thought this
that was
match
so close on my list.
yeah, it's so spectacular of a match. I think without denigrating any other matches on the card, I would say that this was the match of the night for me on this particular. Obviously, star power of the Invasion, the inaugural brawl that was called with the Alliance versus the WWF was the kind of the marquee ticket, the marquee item, the main event of the evening. But this match really came out of nowhere and really didn't have much of a build in terms of a great storyline, other than the fact that we were going with the Alliance versus WWF. And what we got out of it was just this real sort of unsung hero of the era. And I think one of the matches that really helped establish the Invasion angle for what it was. Now, a lot of people obviously have, contradictory thoughts and beliefs in terms of the Invasion angle. Some people love it, some people hate it, and I would say most are in between. But we do have this match, which helps really establish a pace and actually is one of the great moments that helps bring together talents from separate companies that we maybe thought we'd never see. This would be a dream match on anybody's card at the time. So I really think that it helped establish a great precedent for what we were going to see in the weeks and months ahead.
Yeah, I mean, this was very close. It was between this and the Triple H to be number 7. And as you probably know, I've been very fortunate to interview Rob Van Dam, and absolute gentleman, great guy. And we spoke about this match, and I spoke about this match in particular and his feud and his friendship with Jeff Hardy. And he just had nothing but praise for Jeff. He said, we've just got such the same wavelength. You ask Jeff to do something and he would just do it. He said he's the greatest guy to work with and helped him. And I said to Robert, I said, believe it or not, Rob, I said, because over here in the UK, I didn't have much access to ECW. This was actually the first time I watched Rob Van Dam wrestle, which I know it's sacrilege because he's an ECW guy, but, this was the first time I saw him. And I was blown away. And I said to him, I said, Jeff Hardy was my guy. And Rob said to me, he's like, yeah, he quickly became your number 2 after you watched me, didn't he?
That's funny. That's very funny. I've always been an admirer of Rob Van Dam's work. And in fact, I remember it wasn't too long after this match that we just spoke of that RVD would be inserted into the title picture. In fact, we saw a match here in Toronto in the early part of September of 2001, where we would see Rob Van Dam go up against Steve Austin for the championship in a match on television. And it was such a fun match. I'll always love the way that RVD takes a stunner. And then, of course, we'd fast forward to the No Mercy pay-per-view in 2001, where it was a triple threat match with Rob Van Dam, Steve Austin, and Kurt Angle. So he was elevated quite quickly. And I dare say that a big part of the reason why he was elevated so quickly, obviously he was a great talent and had that, the aforementioned it factor. But to me, without question, this Jeff Hardy match really helped establish RVD in the company.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, obviously, thankfully, RVD did become champion. Unfortunately, it didn't last as long as what we would like. But man, this and like the Invasion angle, I'll be honest, a lot of people, I don't know if so much people hates it, but they feel like it was a wasted opportunity. And I can see that side. We never had NWO, Goldberg or Sting during this time. And it is a bit of a waste, but I'll be honest. And like I said, this is 2001, so 11/12-year-old me, I was gripped to the TV every week, like seeing the factions and the feuds happening in between. And like growing up watching it, I really enjoyed it. And I'm tempted to go through and watch it again on the network. I know you mentioned previously like 96, 97 were your years. And last year I watched the full 1997 Raw. I was not disappointed. It was a very, very great year, and man, Bret Hart as a heel, I fucking loved it. Sorry for my language.
That okay.
But yeah, 2000, like I was gripped watching it, and when you saw these factions interact with each other, and seeing the Hardy Boys as WCW Tag Team Champions, for example, and then seeing I don't know Booker T and Test as WWF Tag Team Champions, it was chaotic, and I mean, you couldn't help but watch it because things was changing so much. It could have been better. I fully agree with that, but it's not the dog shit that people says it is. But yeah, this match at Invasion, unbelievable match. And watching Van Damme for the first time, I was convinced he was related to Jean-Claude Van Damme. I was so convinced. Um, but yeah, great match. So many spots. The opening where they're dodging each other, dodging leg drops and countering it to the point, on top of the stage where Jeff Hardy's got the chair and Van Damme hits the Van Damme and Jeff literally disappears into the stage. So many great moments this match. Unbelievable match and definitely a highlight. And I wanted to put it on, and I should have done. Now I'm talking about it. But yeah, great stuff, and it led to a great match at SummerSlam that year, and a ladder match for the hardcore title. And this was the most important hardcore title, was in my opinion. Like RVD and Jeff, to a degree, elevated it from like a really, really lower card comedy title to a title what was getting featured prominently, and Van Damme was like main eventing shows with it. So yeah, great feud and great match.
Yeah, absolutely. And I couldn't have said it better myself. In terms of the invasion angle, if anybody wants to hear how myself and my regular co-host Tyrone would rebook it, or how we would reshape it, or what we think should have happened, then by all means check out our archives, on YouTube or on www.countout7.com. We have about a 2-hour meal made out of that particular angle and how we would have booked it. And I think it's a fun listen. So by all means, go out your way to check that out. With that being said, the next match I have on my card here to catch us up to number 2, which would be my number 3, is CM Punk versus Jeff Hardy at SummerSlam 2009. Of course, we mentioned this before. It was that TLC match, Jeff's final match in the company, and then he would go off and end up in Impact about 6 or 8 months later. And then from there, we wouldn't see Jeff back in the company until, WrestleMania 33 that we already discussed. So this match was, this is one of these feuds where I'm not particularly keen on bringing real life situations into wrestling. If someone's struggling with personal problems, and I certainly don't want to get into a great lengthy discussion about that kind of stuff. That's something that's, I think, private for the performer, and we don't need to, really expand upon that overly. But it seems like this is something that the WWF and WWE has done now for a number of years. I remember the first time I recall hearing it was when Jake the Snake Roberts was feuding with Jerry the King Lawler in 1996 and bringing up his alcoholism and things of that nature. I thought it was in poor taste. I also thought to use that as a device in this particular angle, talking about the fact that CM Punk is straight edge and Jeff Hardy, who had some problems, I think was in poor taste. I understand, it helps to build drama and realism to the feud, but personally, it's not my favorite way to get a match in the ring. With that being said, however, I did really enjoy the match. And of course, being the Undertaker fan that I am, I did not hate the way that we went off the air on that particular night with the Undertaker suddenly appearing. It was a great way to send Jeff Hardy off and not miss a beat in terms of the storytelling, immediately having CM Punk be in jeopardy with the Undertaker. So what are your memories of this match, and how do you feel about what I've just sort of mentioned about the personal issues being brought into angles?
Yeah, it's a weird one. Sometimes it can be done right, but and especially with Jeff in particular, they've done it a few times. They did it with him feuding with Sheamus last year, like talk about his drinking problems. So it's getting to the point now. It's beating the dead horse, really. the odd time, I think it depends how comfortable the wrestler is with it and if they're over it. Unfortunately, Jeff, I like to think Jeff is up really on the straight and narrow now, especially now that he's got a family. But I think even back then he was still, he was having some issues because he was arrested not much after it. But I think what it is, people, can we swear? um, people loves a fuck up.
You
What I
can
mean,
swear as much as you like, my friend.
people are drawn to the fuck ups. People are drawn to the underdogs. People are drawn to the people that makes mistakes, and they know that person is good hearted, and this person can't help it, but he makes mistakes. And obviously, that's Jeff Hardy. We know Jeff Hardy is a good person, and the guy has made a lot of mistakes, but we still love Jeff. And I don't think there's a wrestling fan that doesn't like Jeff Hardy. I've never met one, or I've never seen one online. Obviously, he gets the idiots what says, "Oh, so and so is overrated." Um, but and with Punk's character at the time, like the straight edge character, I suppose we're supposed to cheer a straight edge character, thinking this guy's good. You know, he doesn't drink, doesn't smoke, he's healthy. You know, he's preaching it. This guy's good, and it's a good gimmick as a babyface. But one thing people hate is being preached to, like saying, you can't do this, you can't do that. Look at me, I'm like this, I'm like that. And the dynamic between CM Punk and Jeff Hardy worked so well because of this angle. Like, Punk is like, look at me, how many convictions have I had? Zero. How many drug issues have I had? Zero. And that's what he's saying. And Jeff Hardy, you still love Jeff, and Jeff was doing the on the microphone. He was like, "I've had problems and that, and I'm addicted, and I'm gonna beat you and things like that." And they kind of done a similar thing with Lesnar and Guerrero a couple of years earlier. Guerrero cut one of the best promos of his career because of it. Sometimes it's a good thing, but other times depends on the situation. I've seen it used very poorly, especially that Jake Roberts and Jerry Lawler feud you mentioned, because Jerry Lawler actually tipped whiskey on Jake the Snake Roberts, which was a bad move. And they done it similar with Austin and Scott Hall. I think Austin poured beer over his head, and obviously Scott Hall, his alcohol problems don't need saying. We know what these issues is. So when it's done in really, really poor taste, it's horrible. Sometimes it can work, and I think this was one of the times it did work. So it is a 50-50 thing. As for the match itself, great match. I don't think this was actually his last match, though. I think he actually had one more match on the following SmackDown, a cage match, which was a loser leaves town match, and then he went to Impact like 6 months later. I might be wrong because I remember the following week, like his music hit, but it was CM Punk dressed up as Jeff Hardy, and he was so convincing the way he looked. But as for the match itself, great spot, and Jeff diving off ladders through tables as normal, and eventually, like CM Punk caught the title, and like I said, mentioned earlier with the Night of Champions match, uh, Jeff Hardy, and we mentioned it, like we don't realize how many people Jeff has elevated because RVD was talented and he was a big star, but Jeff elevated him to WWE audiences to say, look at this guy's great. Same thing with Punk. Punk was popular in Ring of Honor and the Indies, but I had no idea about Ring of Honor or the Indies. I never heard of CM Punk till I saw him pop up on WWE ECW. That was me, and he was a good babyface, and I was getting behind him, and he was good. But Jeff elevated CM Punk and made CM Punk a star, and it worked so well this heel. And quickly after this, CM Punk became straight edge savior and had the straight edge society, which was a great faction. And yeah, it all came from this feud with Jeff Hardy. So yeah, great match.
Yeah, you have some very interesting points there. In fact, you are correct. He did have one final match on SmackDown the following week in a steel cage in which he lost to CM Punk, he being Jeff Hardy. And it is very interesting that you bring up that point. I think it's sometimes lost that many times it's not only in wrestling but in film and television, in any form of entertainment media. Oftentimes the villain or the antagonist is not necessarily saying something that's incorrect. They're not necessarily saying something that's derisive or mean spirited. Many times they're in fact telling you the truth, but the way the message is delivered becomes so incredibly irritating, or the methods in which they use to convey the message become so convoluted, and so ultimately they end up becoming the villain themselves. It really is sort of indicative of what you're talking about with CM Punk here. I think absolutely that straight edge society and the straight edge lifestyle and things of that nature. I mean, in theory, it's a great thing. Don't drink, don't smoke, don't do drugs. Eat right, stay healthy, all this kind of stuff. Exercise. That's all positive. That's all positive messaging. But the way in which it's delivered becomes so incredibly, I guess, what would be the right way to say it? I guess divisive. I beg your pardon?
I was thinking like he was quite narcissistic about it. It was like, and it was getting to the point, I'm betting you. And a similar one as well. And I thought this was the best work of this guy's career was during when Daniel Bryan was like the planet's savior. It was such a great gimmick. And even though I loved Kofi becoming champion, it came to the detriment of Bryan's reign, because I thought, man, that title reign should have lasted longer because it was such a great gimmick.
Exactly. And that's exactly what I'm alluding to. Is it's not necessarily that the message is incorrect or the message is wrong. It's more to do with the delivery of the message and the methods in which they will go, the lengths they will go as the villain to espouse their message, then becomes the device for them to become sort of villainous and become the antagonist. And then somebody like the Jeff Hardy is sort of becoming the underdog, becoming the one that the fans are cheering for, wanting to see him ascend to that next level because he has had challenges and people can relate to that. Again, nobody's perfect. Everybody makes mistakes in life. We all have, moments that we wish we could take back, but that's really what helps resonate with a character like Jeff Hardy, is people can see themselves in the character to some degree, some more than others. And that's what helps make him the kind of underdog hero that we want to see prevail in the end. And I think that's why this particular feud worked as well as it did.
Yeah, well said.
So I am very curious to see what your number one is. I'm wondering if it's going to be the same as mine. I have a feeling we're on the same page here, but I will let you take the floor. And why don't you hit us with, before we do that, just briefly recapping, we have already discussed our number two, which was The Undertaker versus Jeff Hardy on Monday Night Raw from 2002. We both kind of were in the same wheelhouse in terms of our thinking about that match. So without further ado, James, drum roll, please. Our number one Jeff Hardy moment of his career is...
becoming WWE champion at Armageddon 2008 in that triple threat match against Edge and Triple H.
We have a winner. I am on board with you. We are both on the same page. I absolutely 100% agree with this. For any wrestler ever in the history of the last 30 years or so of wrestling, 35, 40 years even, obviously being the WWE World Wrestling Federation, World Wrestling Entertainment Champion is the absolute pinnacle of the business. Maybe you'd get some contradictory answers now in 2020 with an AEW or what have you, but I think ultimately that is the holy grail of championships. And so for those reasons, I want to hear all about why you chose this match.
Yeah, and like I've alluded to earlier, like Jeff Hardy was one of the first guys I saw when I started watching WWE full time again in 2000, and he stood out to me, and him and Matt, and I was just gravitated towards Jeff. I was like, this is my guy. He was a young guy, and obviously I'm a teenager, and he was tagging with Matt, his brother. He had Leacher on board, and like I mentioned earlier, as an impressionable 11 to 12-year-old, Lita was my cup of tea, as we say in the UK. But Jeff Hardy just gravitated towards him. He was just my guy, and like we mentioned, and he's quite a tall guy. Like, he's not like he's 5'6", 5'7". I think he's about 6 foot, but compared to the wrestlers of this era, he was tiny when you got the likes of Kane, Taker, Stone Cold Rock, and Triple H and such. And obviously, it looked like he was he was the next Shawn Michaels, people saying. Obviously not for an in-ring perspective, but for popularity and like coming from a tag team. And it looked like he was going that way. And obviously he had that match with Taker in 2002, great match. And it looked like he was getting higher and higher. It wasn't to be. He had some drug issues, left in 2000, early 2003, done some work over in old school TNA and some indies and such, and made his grand return in 2006. I remember when he returned because I was in college, and I was so excited. I had some great runs with the IC belts, some great feuds with the likes of John Morrison, Umaga, rest in peace, and many others. Some fun matches with Shelton Benjamin and Carlito. So, and it was like he was just taking that step by step, getting higher and higher, more popular. I had another tag run with Matt Hardy, became tag champions again. Some great matches with Eminem, and then he moved to SmackDown after the Orton feud, which we mentioned previously. He got done for drugs, made his return, got drafted to SmackDown. Basically, he was in this feud with Triple H for the biggest part of the year. Nearly won the title at Unforgiven Championship Scramble match. Faced him at No Mercy, where almost had him beat. He was so close, like 1-on-1 for the title. Same as Taboo Tuesday, or Cyber Sunday, it might have been by then, but nearly again. It was never going to happen. He was meant to be in the three-way triple threat match against Vladimir Kozlov and Triple H at Survivor Series that year. He got took out before the match, and Edge came back and he became champion. And it was like they need to stick the belt on him. And leading up to it, it was going to be a three-way. Actually had a match against Taker over here in the UK. Great match, defeated Taker, and it was the first time, one of the first times Jeff started sporting full face paint. I know in 2002 and early 2003 he experimented with face paint and mainly the glow paint, but this is when he started using the full face paint, and he was so over. I think I'm sure I read it for merch sales. He was near enough neck and neck with Cena, or he was just actually getting a little bit above Cena. It was so close. He was so popular, and this match, first of all, it's a great match, but Jeff Hardy, he was the underdog at the three. You had Triple H, obviously multi-time world champion, main eventer for the past 8 years. Edge established himself as a main eventer now for the last 3 or 4 years now, a multiple-time world champion. Jeff Hardy, he's been flirting with the main event for these years, and it's like he's never going to win the big one. And yeah, so many great spots. The spear going through the table, Jeff hitting a whisper in the wind when I think Triple H has got Edge on his shoulders, and Jeff hits a whisper into it. Great spot. And then it looks like Jeff's going to win. Kozlov comes out, he interferes. Matt Hardy makes a save. Triple H hits the pedigree on Edge, and you think, right, it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, Jeff hits a swanton. And there's one guy in particular in the crowd. He's got long hair, and then he had a grey t-shirt on. He was a bigger Jeff Hardy fan than me that night, and he was so excited. And when that 3 count hit, I was like, wow, I can't believe it's finally happened. And just all these years, like, he joined WWE in like 94, 95 as a jobber. And obviously he's been like a main roster person since like 98, for example. So 10 years, pretty much 10 or 11 years, he's been working to get to this point. And obviously he's had a lot of troubles in between. We've documented his drug issues and stuff. And finally hit the pinnacle, got the 1, 2, 3 and WWE champion. And like I said, from me catching him quite early on in his WWE career, seeing him win tag titles, Europeans, hardcore, light heavyweights, and obviously eventually IC title to the point where finally got the WWE title. This is my favorite WWE championship win of all time because I was such a big Jeff Hardy fan. I still am, and it would be great if he had another run. I don't think it's going to happen, but the fact that he had this moment, and yeah, this is up there my favorite moments in the history of wrestling. Definitely my favorite WWE title win of a wrestler. So unbelievable moment. Title run could have been a bit longer, but it led to another feud with Matt Hardy. But yeah, for a one-off moment, this can't be beat for me.
Well, I don't think there's much I can add to that. I mean, I am a big Jeff Hardy fan as well, not to the extent that you are. So I'm very glad that you chose this list, and I'm glad that you were able to kind of walk us through your recollections of the match. It's very clear listening to you that you are such a fan of his and such an admirer of his skills in the ring and the performer that he is. So there was an emotional connection that really came through with you describing the moments leading up to the win. I could not top that if I even tried. I am very grateful that you told us all about your memories and moments of Jeff Hardy. I've had an opportunity to meet the man, and
awesome.
In fact, I was in Dallas for Wrestlemania 32 when he was there for the weekend, and I wasn't aware that he was having issues with any types of substance, so I did have a couple of drinks with him, and in fact, a shot of Fireball or two, which was fun. Had I known that things were kind of going in a different direction, I maybe would have abstained. But at the time, I didn't think much of it. It was a lot of fun to get to know him, and we have some pictures and things of that nature together. So it's a great memory for me. I'm a fan of his. I'm a fan of his family. I think that both him and his brother are very well deserved of all the accolades that they've been given throughout their career and what they've earned for themselves. James, I'm so thankful that you came on this week and talked to us about Jeff Hardy and your love of his career and his moments and the profound admiration you have for the man himself. Just before we move on to some more business, would you mind briefly just running down your top 7 list, just bullet point by bullet point, so we can have a recollection and a clear understanding of what our lists are this week?
Yeah, no problem. So yeah, number 7, Jeff Hardy defeating Triple H for his first IC title on SmackDown in 2001. Number 6, defeating CM Punk at Night of Champions for his third and up to now final world title run in WWE at Night of Champions. Then the big swanton and feud with Randy Orton in general, leading up to Royal Rumble 2008. And number 4, the return for him and Matt Hardy at WrestleMania 33, which I think everyone smiled when that happened. Number 3, just the basic TLC tables, ladders, chairs feuds with Edge and Christian and Dudley, and what I consider the pinnacle for tag team wrestling. Number 2 is ladder match with Undertaker on Raw for the undisputed title, and yeah, number 1 to top it all off, him becoming WWE champion at Armageddon 2008.
There you go. And in terms of my list this week, I had the Hardys versus Edge and Christian at No Mercy 1999 in the ladder match for the Terry Invitational Tournament Finals. I have the Hardy Boys return at WrestleMania 33 as my number 6. Number 5 is both TLC's 1 and 2. Number 4 for me would be versus Rob Van Dam at Invasion 2001. Number 3 for me would be versus CM Punk at SummerSlam 2009. Number 2 that we both agree on is The Undertaker versus Jeff Hardy on Monday Night Raw in a ladder match for the undisputed WWE Championship. And then, of course, number 1 is, again, one that we both see eye to eye on, which is the Triple H, Edge, and Jeff Hardy triple threat match for the WWE Championship at Armageddon 2008. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, that is our list for this week. I am, again, so grateful that, James, you made time to hop on and be a part of our program this week. We'd love to have you back if you'd ever want to possibly try your hand at rebooking. That's typically what we do, is rebook cards and try to reshape and mold them to make them a little bit better if they are not maybe the most thrilling of events that we've seen in the past. Or, of course, we could do another one of these top 7 lists. We could do a watch along. We would love to have you back on, and it really was an honor to have you. Would you be interested in jumping back on with us at some point?
Yeah, man, I would love it. And I mean, who doesn't love fantasy booking?
Absolutely. That's what we have built our podcast on. So we would love to have you on there. James, can you just tell us again about your podcast and tell us about your social media handles briefly?
Yeah, thanks very much. I had a blast doing this. Really enjoyed it. And yeah, like I said, everyone there, if you, some of the names we've mentioned tonight, Rob Van Dam, hopefully one day Jeff Hardy will be on the show. But yeah, I do interviews. I normally go quite career in-depth interviews. I've done over 60 interviews, I think I've done now. Wow. So many names. A couple of indie stars, some rising, but a lot of established names. Like I said, I've interviewed Bischoff, Russo, RVD, Diamond Dallas Page, many others. I've been very fortunate and really enjoyed my time talking to all of them. And we also do monthly pay-per-view reviews. Myself, Mags, Dan, and Rob, and we do that on podcast form and on video format. And started experimenting, actually putting up clips along with the videos, which my last episode, Wrestlemania 9, got took down 40 times, but eventually I made it work. So if you want to check out reviews, that'd be great. And like I said, I've also got Cafe Day Renee with Renee Dupree, if you just want to check that out. And if you want to follow me on social media, follow me on Twitter at 90s Wrestling Pod. And I'm also on Instagram, that 90s Wrestling Podcast.
That is outstanding. I can't wait to listen to what you have coming up, and I'm definitely going to check out that Renee Dupree content. And we're going to set something up for the next little while. Maybe in the next few weeks, we can see if we can't do something like a fun fantasy booking type thing. Pick an event that we're both fond of and we think we can improve upon, and we could have a little fun with that. Again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you again, James, from That 90s Wrestling Podcast, for jumping on with us this week. We have some exciting content coming for you in the weeks and months ahead. We're not quite sure where we're steering this ship at the moment, but rest assured, I am at the helm, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I don't know if I'm Captain Hook or Captain Crunch here, possibly Captain Kirk. We all know how I love William Shatner. I met him this weekend, which was a lot of fun. That's another story for another time. Nice. Ladies and gentlemen, you have been enjoying content in regards to the top 7 Jeff Hardy moments in the WWE. My guest this week was James of That 90s Wrestling Podcast, pardon me. You can catch us on Instagram at good_enemies and on Twitter at good_enemies. And of course, on www.countitout7.com. Ladies and gentlemen, we will be back next week with some brand new content for you. But in the meantime, you've been listening to the Good Friends, Better Enemies podcast.